Again, welcome to the annual meeting. Welcome to Portland, Oregon, for those of you who are joining us in the room. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, we are glad to have you with us. The agenda for today's annual meeting is one that's going to be, I think, a very interesting one. You're going to have an opportunity to hear from this year's Kevin O'Donnell Award winner. We also have a keynote speaker, a professor of sociology from here at Portland State University. And then we will also do our traditional award of the Giving Back initiative that Friends of Korea gives out at the annual meeting annually. So that's what we have planned. I'm going to ask Jerry. Here I am looking around like, where's Jerry? I know he's there someplace. Jerry, will you introduce? Is he back?
Yeah, he's there.
Jerry, will you introduce our next speaker?
Yes, I will. I very
Okay,
much.
thanks.
It'll be my honor. And I'll take 1 minute before I do that. I'd like to also give a shout out before I forget to Diane Odell. Are you out there in the audience?
Yes,
Yep.
she's waiting.
Okay. Diane was a Peace Corps volunteer in the very first group. She lives in Oregon. She has the most energy of any individual I know, and she served as our on-the-ground liaison there. So if you can give a virtual round of applause for Diane Odell as well. And now it is my honor to introduce to you Mr. Glenn Blumhorst. And Glenn presently is serving as the Chief Advancement Officer for the Peace Corps Commemorative Foundation. You may or may not know that there will be a memorial in Washington, D.C. For Peace Corps. And Glenn is involved in, again, the advancement aspect of that. Glenn served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala for many years. Many of you know him as the president and CEO of the National Peace Corps Association. I believe almost 10 years, 9 to 10 years, I think, Glenn. And a wonderful individual. They couldn't have chosen a better person to lead the advancement initiative for the commemorative. So to everyone, I would like to welcome Mr. Glenn Blumhorst.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I really appreciate that, for your kind words and for the warm introduction and the warm welcome and the opportunity to join your meeting today. I'll be quick, and I just want to first and foremost say thank you to all of you, because Friends of Korea has been a supporter of the Peace Corps Commemorative Project for quite some time, including your financial leadership, and we're very grateful for that. I'm going to run through through some slides here real quick, just to give you a little bit more of a visual of what we're up to. We believe that in Washington, D.C., as you know, there are a lot of memorials and monuments, statues and otherwise, that are attributed to what? To wars and war heroes and conflicts and battles and that sort of a thing. But there really is not anything that commemorates the values and ideals of service to others, and particularly through Peace Corps service. So we believe it's time to change that and tell America's story. That's what this is really all about. It's not commemorative to the Peace Corps or to an individual related to the Peace Corps. It's really about telling the Peace Corps story to the world. And that includes Americans as well as our international guests to Washington, D.C. and around. So as you may know, you've been following this, I think, for a while. When I was at National Peace Corps Association back in 2014, and I was there for nearly 10 years, and last year was asked to step up and provide leadership to this flagship initiative. What that means by advancement is basically get this project over the goal line, right? And it's come a long way, but it still has some things to get done before we can cross the goal line, but I'm working hard to make that happen. Going way back to 2014, and prior to this, we had advocated for the legislation to have it congressionally authorized. It was passed in 2014 and signed into law, and then again signed into law in 2021, reauthorizing the commemorative work in Washington, D.C. It is on National Park Service land. That's why it has to be congressionally authorized. And as you can see from the map, we were assigned a really ideal location for the Peace Corps commemorative, right there at the foot of the Capitol grounds and just a stone's throw away from the National Mall. So we're very fortunate to have a really ideal site in a lot of foot traffic area, as well as very accessible to a number of sites right there at the National Mall. We jumped through several hoops also over the last about 8 years that it took to go from around 200 proposals for a design idea down to some design concepts, narrowing that down to one design artist and a team that worked with National Park Service and the DC Commission of Fine Arts and the Peace Corps Commemorative Foundation to finally gain approval of the design concept for the Peace Corps Commemorative Park last year. So with that in mind, now we're able to move full speed ahead with the actual development of the final design and start moving toward construction documents and all the other preparations that are involved in actually constructing Peace Corps Park, as we now call it. We've stopped really referring to it as commemorative park. We want commemorative work. We want this to be a place that commemorates the Peace Corps and its ideals, especially, but we also want it to be an interactive experience and a park-like setting for individuals. So we're naming it a Peace Corps Park, and this has come from the suggestions that have come from our own community. The design that you can see here is, as I said, the final concept. It looks like this. There will be a circular plaza that will have a map of the world without borders. Those depictions on the ground will demonstrate that the world is symbolically a global community. And then their circle is surrounded by 3 granite embracing arms that also serve as benches to sit on. The 3 arms really just symbolizing the embracing nature of our community and our culture and giving and receiving and really all about interacting with others. Our landscaper has also designed this to be a setting where it will be quiet and serene and a place of reflection and with plenty of greenery to surround the actual granite construction, making it a very inviting place to visit and to settle into and sit back and relax and reminisce a bit. So with all of this now in order, we have, as you can see here, the majority of the work is behind us actually. The final design is underway right now as we speak. We're expecting it to be presented back to the National Park Service and the Commission on Fine Arts in the first quarter of next year. It should be approved within that time frame, within the first quarter of next year. And then the construction documents and the rest of the paperwork and permits and everything that has to be done would develop over the next 5 to 6 months after that. So we are on track to break ground for this project about this time next year from a technical implementation standpoint. And from that point, it would take anywhere from 6 to 8 months to actually construct the Peace Corps Park. And that would be then leaving us right around spring, late spring, early summer of 2025, that we would anticipate cutting the ribbon on Peace Corps Park. We have begun our campaign to raise funds for it. Right now, what I'm really most engaged in is raising awareness. We want people to be aware of this park. We want them to provide input to us and thoughts and ideas about it and how we can bring it to life. But we have already raised well over $2 million toward the $10 million goal that we have. The $10 million is including an endowment that we would pay into the National Park Service for perpetual maintenance of the site. And I should say that the board of directors, all volunteers themselves, former Peace Corps directors, former members of Congress, business leaders, and others, have demonstrated financial leadership in raising and or contributing themselves roughly $1.5 million. We have 100% participation from all of our board and very generous board members, including a couple that have given well into the 6 figures on the gifts for this project. We are moving forward with our campaign now. It really just started as we get closer to the construction point of the park. But how do we bring this place alive is the question, and this is what we've been asking you, and we've been getting a lot of feedback from our community on. So we're going to develop this visitor app. This came to us as an idea based on what we saw at the World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C. you can walk by the World War I Memorial and you'll get a notification on your iPhone that you're at the World War I Memorial. So we'll have this space geo-fenced, meaning it'll be geotagged and referenced, so that as you walk, anybody with an iPhone walks by, they will get a pop-up notification, welcome to Peace Corps Park, stop in for a visit, right? Pull out your iPhone, click here to download a virtual explorer or a visitor app, and you'll be able to pull up an app that can pretty much provide any kind of content that we want it to. This could be, for example, information about John F. Kennedy and the founding of the Peace Corps, where the history of the Peace Corps and how it came about, and his vision for service, the medical kits of the Peace Corps, and what was involved, a little bit about what happened there, and what you got when you were a Peace Corps volunteer back in the 60s. And then in the big frame there, looking at it, you could potentially point your iPhone at any space on that map, and it would pull up stories of service from Peace Corps volunteers in that country, returned Peace Corps volunteer podcasts, books by returned Peace Corps volunteers, exhibits from the Peace Corps Museum that is working in collaboration with us. So through technology, we can really curate a lot of digital content that becomes essentially the educational element of this entire project. And by creating an interactive visitor experience, we really can engage visitors in a variety of different ways, and including the visitors don't even have to be at the site. You'll be able to access this site from anywhere in the world through the Virtual Explorer, and you'll be able to see the interactive exhibits and parts and pieces of it through the virtual reality that we can install on these apps. So really excited about this element of it. For me, this is what really brings Peace Corps Plaza alive, the Peace Corps Park alive. It's a beautiful site, a beautiful design, but this is the third dimension of this project that for me is really about creating impact by telling our Peace Corps story to others who visit and who want to learn more about our service. So real quick, recently I was up in Madison, Wisconsin, and we are moving forward with the selection of the granite on the left side. The standing up block there is Silver Cloud granite. That is the granite that we've selected for the benches. And then laying down on the ground there are the pavers that will go on the plaza. We are down to two that we're deciding between in terms of what kind of granite that will be. The Silver Cloud granite standing upright is from a quarry, will be from a quarry in near Atlanta, Georgia. The other pavers will probably come from a quarry in Vermont. And then the finish on them is yet to be determined. But we have homed in on these. We think they're really beautiful pieces of granite. They're coming from places in the United States where we believe there's high quality granite that is available. And as you look in the upper right photo there, what you're seeing is for the memorial to the 9 individuals in Charleston, South Carolina that were killed several years ago, they are creating a memorial there. And they are creating benches much like what we have envisioned for Peace Corps Plaza. And while we were up there, I got to see the robots at work sculpting away on these large blocks of granite and creating these benches for that particular memorial. This is what it'll look like when we have our blocks brought up from Atlanta. We're going to bring the entire length of the block, 34 feet, around 44 tons, I believe it is, and they'll be able to sit it into their facility and run these robots 24/7 and carve those benches and pieces for the sculpted hands for Peace Corps Park. So it's getting really exciting. We're really going to start seeing this work happen soon, and that's what's, for me, really exciting about it. This is our budget. It's a $10 million project, like we said, and we're on the way there, making considerable progress with the funds that we need to raise, and very happy with the response that our community has given, and including Friends of Korea. I want to thank you again for your donation. We had, I think, a grant from the organization itself for $5,000, but several other individuals contributed gifts from your membership, bringing that total up close to $10,000. So thank you very much for that. PepsiCo Foundation is our lead corporate funder with donations of $250,000. And we have several other organizations that have contributed between $25,000 to $100,000 in donations as well. Our donation list is getting longer and longer as we go. Everybody's sending in contributions and wanting to be a part of this. So we're very pleased with the response that the community has provided for us. We really have not even fully engaged in our campaign yet, but the donations are coming in. And if you'd like, we're not here to solicit gifts today, but certainly the door is open for any contributions that would like to be made. Officers and board of directors are here. You know, most of these people, these are outstanding leaders that I'm working with. They're opening doors. They're doing a lot of the work themselves, rolling up their sleeves and keeping busy. And it's just an outstanding group of people to provide leadership to this initiative. Our advisory board, now that we've formed, includes most of the former Return Peace Corps volunteer members of Congress, the former Peace Corps directors, almost all of them are members, and others, governors, and likewise are part of our advisory board that also are working with us to help provide leadership for this initiative. So not sure what happened there. Sorry about that. But this is just a last look at the commemorative. It's going to be a beautiful place for us to go. I was a visitor to Washington, D.C. when I was a 17-year-old high school kid. I know that if I had come across this thing and it popped up on my iPhone and I'd learned about Peace Corps, I would have decided at that moment that I was going to serve in the Peace Corps. My dad had been a Marine, my brother was in the Army, but I would have known from the values and ideals that I saw as part of what Peace Corps is, I would have decided then that Peace Corps is for me. So if you'd like more information, please contact me. There's our my email. The website, of course, is www.peacecorpscommemorative.org. Thank you again for letting me be a part of your program today. Really hope you've enjoyed this. You've made this possible thanks to your gift that provided momentum when we really needed it. I think that was earlier this year or late last year that you made your contribution, your grant to us. And it all matters. It makes a big difference. So thank you again very much for the time to share an update with you.
Okay, so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker for today. So our speaker for today is a professor of sociology at Portland State University. Her name is Professor Hyeyoung Woo, and she serves a lot of roles as faculty at Portland State. She's currently the director of the Institute for Asian Studies. And Professor Woo comes to Portland after completing both her bachelor's and master's at Korea University. She received her PhD from the University of Texas, Austin, and has been a faculty member at Portland State University from 2009. She is the author of countless articles, author and co-author of countless articles, too many to really mention. But I did want to highlight two of her most recent works, which included Korean Families Yesterday and Today, which came out from the University of Michigan Press, which she was a co-author of. And the most recent work, Redefining Multicultural Families in South Korea. And it is from this most recent monograph that she will be presenting today. Professor Woo is an expert on many topics, which include themes of Korean families, gender, demographics in South Korea, education, and multiculturalism. And this issue of multiculturalism is of particular salience right now, given that Korea is becoming more multicultural and will probably need to become more multicultural because of some of the issues of a low birth rate, right? And so it's a very welcome and timely topic, and it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Woo for her talk.
Okay, I think I'm good. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and then thank you so much for such a nice introduction about me for today. So just before I wanted to before I talk about my topic here, and I wanted to just say it is my really great honor to have this is such a meaningful event on our campus. And also I wanted to acknowledge Corinne Hughes, and then she did a lot of work behind the scene to make this, event happen. Okay, right here. Okay. So again, my name is Hyeyoung Woo, and I'm faculty member in Sociology, Department of Sociology at PSU, and I'm also a director of Institute for Asian Studies. So Institute for Asian Studies has been around on campus for almost like 30 decades here at PSU. And then we have done a lot of things related to not only like Korean studies and also Asian studies. But then, in the past few years, because of the pandemic, we were not able to do a lot of things that we were doing. But then since last year, we started working like more things to understand, to increase our understanding about Asian studies as well as Korean studies. And also, by offering some public lectures and events, and also a lot of, sponsoring a lot of events around the campus as well as around the city too. So hopefully we can talk more about those things, and then also hopefully you can find us on social media to see, some of the exciting programs coming out of our institute. So I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna just, move on to this talk here. So I know that in the program, the title of the talk was listed Multicultural Society in South Korea, but then, it is a little bit more about family because that's what I do. And then I kind of wanted to focus more about the family, to think about multicultural society of the Korean right now. So just to brief overview, increase of immigrants since the early 1990s in Korea. So it was about 100,000 in 1990, but then it has been more than like 2 million in 2017, and I'm pretty sure the number is even more now. So it has been like more than 200 times increase during such a short time period. So if you wonder, like, what happened? So right now, the immigrants population make up around 4% of the total population. So this is just a graph that shows, pretty like steep increase of the immigrants in Korea in the last couple decades. And then, it has been more driven by recent influx of the immigrants in South Korea too. So one of them is foreign-born labor forces. So it's especially industrial like trainee program. So Korean government, they kind of came up with this program in 1990s to kind of cover some of the shortage of the labor force, especially in the manufacturer and also agricultural sectors. So that happened because of the expansion of the higher education in Korea too. So since 1980, higher education has expanded dramatically. A lot of people got higher education and college degree. So those people came out with young adults. They just they were equipped with college degree since mid-1980 and also 1990s. And then a lot of them, they didn't want to work in factory or low-skilled jobs. And then, a lot of those positions were just like unfilled. So mostly because of the small like industries and, some of the sectors and mid-sized companies. So they kind of pressured the Korean government, and then they came up with the idea about this like trainee program where they brought a lot of like migrant workers, immigration workers from like Asian countries, including South Asian countries too. So we started having a lot of foreign-born labor forces. And then this is just one of my like picture, one of my favorite graph that shows how quickly education has expanded in Korea too. So a lot of countries here, but then if you look at, so two data points that we can see here, one is 24 to 34 young people, young adults, and then kind of one generation of 55 to 64. But then, it is usually the case where we have like older generation, they tend to have lower levels of education, and then younger generation or younger adults, they tend to have a little bit higher levels of education. But then the gap is really dramatic in Korea over here too. So Korea is all the way to the right to see how quickly education has expanded, education has increased during such a short time period. So this is what was kind of driving, the shortage of those like labor issues, especially for low skill positions and also agricultural sectors. So we started having a lot of like immigration workers. And also another driving force was with foreign-born spouses, like so-called marriage immigrants. But then why do we have marriage immigrants since 1990? So it has been also, the fact that there has been a lot of urbanization in 1980s and 1990s. And then a lot of young people in rural area, they just moved to the big city to work in, a lot of those factories and also a lot of jobs in the big city. But then, it just happened that, a lot of like sons and boys, they were the one who stayed with their parents in the rural area to carry out their like, agricultural business, the family businesses, and also take care of the family. take care of the parents mostly. So, they left in the rural area, and a lot of women, a lot of daughters, they just went to the big city to participate in the labor force. So low skill agricultural sectors and relatively lower educated men, they are the ones who sort of like left in the rural area without getting married. And then it was concerning the government that, we gotta do something about it. So that's when they were actually came up with the idea, a lot of programs that, they were bringing brides from other countries, mostly China, and also Southeast Asia country, including Vietnam and also Philippines. And I think those 3 countries are the major countries. So because of those issues, we started having like huge increase of the immigrants since 1990. So as time in 2005, 1 out of 10 marriages was between Korean men and foreign-born brides. And in rural area, it was even more higher. So 1 out of 3 marriages was like multicultural family, the international marriages. But then if we think about international marriages, it's not that, it just, it didn't exist. It existed in modern Korean history. So it's just a picture that I found is with the Korean women with Japanese men. So this type of international marriages between Korean women and Japanese men happened quite a bit during the colonial period by Japan in early 1900. And also, this is also a picture that I found. So this is like US soldier right after all around the Korean War, and also around the sex business and prostitutes. So a lot of also international marriages also happened around that time between non-Korean men and Korean women. So one common thing between like this couple, this type of couple, and also this type of couple. So international marriages, but it was with Korean women and non-Korean men. So a lot of these couples didn't actually exist in documentation. They were not really like documented well, and then we don't necessarily have a lot of information about them. And then a lot of cases, they moved to US or they moved to Japan, and then, they had kids, but then those kids were not necessarily emerging as issue that didn't necessarily drawing a lot of like interest from the government. However, the international marriages between Korean men and non-Korean women became kind of issue. And part of it because, we have this like blood, like lineage, right? So, it is important that, Korean men, they gotta just to continue on with their family. And then therefore they gotta make sure that, they are married and then they have kids, and then gotta make sure that, we can just bring the brides so that they can have a family and have a kid. So it's a kind of interesting way of like, thinking about like multicultural family in Korea. So just to think about, some context, like trends of international marriages in Korea. So again, it used to be kind of small in numbers, but then it went up pretty sharp around this time, like late 1990 and also early 2000. But then, the number seems a little bit kind of slowing down a little bit, but then it doesn't necessarily mean that the number of international marriages was going down. Instead, this is a number, and then overall, the number of marriages kind of going down. So if we are thinking about the proportions of international marriages, it's not really like going down. It was actually pretty consistent, if not increasing. So if we look at this, so what the line in the top, the blue one is like, sorry about this Korean label at the bottom there. So the top line, the blue line up there was indicating international marriages in total, but then orange line in the middle, that's with Korean men and then non-Korean women. And then the line at the bottom indicating Korean women with non-Korean men. So the number of international marriages have been kind of relatively consistent with the couples between Korean women and non-Korean men. But then the increase has been pretty much kind of salient with the couples between Korean men and non-Korean women. So that's kind of what has been kind of driving a lot of attentions in terms of the policy and also some of the related programs in Korea too. So this is just origins of countries of international spouses. And then here, Korean men with non-Korean women. So if you see the bottom, I mean, if you see those like bars here, so we see like China has been one of the major countries where we see a lot of non-Korean women in the international couples. And then Vietnam is also one of the major countries, and also Philippines, and then Japan, Cambodia, Thailand, US, and others. So well, you can see the majority of the international couples between Korean men and non-Korean women are among with the women from Asian countries. But then if you look at this part here, so Korean women with non-Korean men, so Japan, China, US, they were kind of major countries, but then noticeably like Japan and US is kind of two of the major countries. And that's really kind of distinctive from the case of Korean men here. So we can see that, international marriages are not really the same if we are thinking about like Korean context. So just to make it clear, so 73 Korean men and foreign-born women, so that's the major type of the international marriages, and then 73% on average during this time period. And also among the international couple between Korean men and then foreign-born women, 83% of the foreign-born brides are from Asian countries. So those two things are kind of what sort of like characterize international marriages in Korea. So in fact, it's again, sorry about this, just a picture, but then I kind of wanted to show you, right here, like, it's a 국제결혼, like, international marriages, and then, oh yeah, we have women from like North Korea, and then, oh, so it doesn't matter whether it's first marriage or remarriages. So they were advertising by just having huge like placard. So those scenes, that kind of things were not really like uncommon. So we were able to see a lot of these things, not necessarily right inside of Seoul, but then kind of relatively rural area and then smaller city, the satellite city of the Seoul. And this one is also kind of similar. So they were advertising that, oh yeah, we are just having a huge discount for like, marriage, the matching service. And then we have a lot of women from Vietnam. So that's what basically says. And similar, so we have a really discounted price, and then we have a really great like success rate. And then it doesn't really matter if you're never married or if you're divorced or if you have a disability, and then, everyone is welcome, and then we're going to just find someone for you. So that's basically what it was saying. And then it also says some of the quote, like testimony that, oh yeah, it has been really great to live with like a bride from Vietnam. So this market was pretty big, and a lot of like brokers were actually really active in 2002. So since that point, there were a lot of like, like changes in public media too. So Lee Jasmine, so she was the first non-ethnic Korean and naturalized South Korean to become a lawmaker in 2012. So she's from Philippines, and then she's married to a Korean man, but then she became the lawmaker in 2012. So it was not by the election, but she was the, what do you call that? The proportional? Yeah. Yeah, she was appointed by the major party at that point. So we had this public figure in politics. And also, we had a TV show. It was really popular, and that was basically, all the global talk show. And then, oh yeah, all the beauties from like all of the countries, and then they were just talking about like Korean society and the Korean people, and then all of them were, foreign-born like women. And then their Korean was pretty like fluent, and then they were kind of discussing like a lot of those Korean issues. And then this show was really popular. I believe this show was the first show that we had in a like nationwide broadcasting company. And then this show also lasted for quite a long time. I believe from 2006 to 2010. And similar format, but it's all by men. And then again, they are like foreign-born individuals. Their Korean was fluent, and then they were discussing like social issues and some of the cultural differences and things like that. So again, this one was also one of the very first TV show that was pretty popular, and then it also lasted for quite a long time too, from like 2014 to 2017. So we had more exposures. So we had this public figure in politics, and we also had these TV shows that were aired in the nationwide broadcasting companies. So along with those changes, we also had like proportions of the children and adolescents from multicultural family increases too. So we had international marriages, and of course we are going to expect to see some of the increases of the family, the kids from the multicultural families too. So the blue bar here, they are the elementary school kids. So they are the proportions. So a little bit over 1%, it was 2012, but then it has increased over time. So at this point, most economy, it's about like 4% of the kids are actually, among the elementary kids, are from the multicultural family. And then this proportion is a little bit lower for like middle school and also high school. But then again, we can see that, we now see, kids from multicultural families a lot more than we used to in the past. And also, reflecting the trends, we also had this movie. So I believe this movie was also one of the very first movie that was not, really small independent movie. It was one of the major movie that was, showing in a lot of like theaters. So this movie came out 2011, I believe, and then this boy was supposed to be the boy from like multicultural family. And then, this movie was really kind of first one depicting, what it is like to be a kid from multicultural family in Korea. So emerging multicultural families kind of brought some of the issues, some of the questions that we didn't have in the past. So unprecedented questions about immigrants' adaptation and immigrants' rights. And also we were thinking about, we have to think about implementation of social policy and community level support programs. And of course, we kind of had some of those like changes in the law too. So for example, some of the major changes, major implementation of the policies and revisions in the law include 2006, like plan for supporting the social integration of women. Marriage immigrants and family. And also 2008, we also had a Multicultural Family Support Act. So we didn't have the term of multicultural family in 2006, but then we sort of like people kind of, had this idea that, yeah, multicultural family would be a good term to use. So what they had this Multicultural Family Support Act in 2008. But then both of them were from Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. So it's kind of interesting to kind of see that, those changes were actually brought by Ministry of like Gender Equality and Family instead of like Ministry of Justice or foreign individual law. So you can kind of see that, those things were primarily aiming for those marriage immigrant women, not necessarily other kinds of foreign-born individuals in the country. So a lot of cases, those things were like aiming to provide a support program for to help those marriage immigrant women kind of integrate into the society rather than just accepting them as like individual, like foreign-born individual, or just individual or immigrants individual in the country. So that means a lot of cases, the families or couples between Korean women and non-Korean men, they were not necessarily eligible for a lot of the programs that they were trying to offer here. So they were aware of those limitations, and then they have this, now Ministry of Justice came up with the basic plan for immigration policy. So that's also one of the major revisions that we had related to foreign-born individuals in the country. But then basically this one is for, the preferred immigrants. So it was about visa status and also visa period, the kind of visa, and also the each durations for those visa programs. But then, they have those professionals, preferred immigrants, or ideal individuals that they like to have in the country. So their visa status and also durations were relatively flexible, but then they had a pretty strict about low-skilled workers, migrant laborers, and then also which are a lot of cases for a lot of international marriages between Korean women and non-Korean men. So a lot of those couples, international couples, they were actually having hard time to be naturalized or to get permanent residency in the country because their visa status was really kind of hard to renew. And also they were supposed to go through a different route to get the marriage acknowledged in the system. So we also started seeing a lot of burgeoning research on immigrants since 2000. So a lot of cases, those studies were looking at, women, especially in terms of adaptation or cultural assimilation in the country. So that perspective was kind of dominant. And also the marriage equality. So that's also one of the dominant topic that we see. And also some of the domestic violence related issue. That's also another common things. We also had a lot of studies looking at the kids, how they are doing at school too. So was, rather kind of limited scope of the literature that we saw related to immigration. And that's partly because of the way the recent immigration kind of expanded in the country. So because of those issues, we had this work. So my colleague Min Jung Kim at San Diego State University, we had this edited volume. So one thing, Dr. Danny Kim, so this is not monograph, this is edited volume that we put together, working with multiple contributing authors from different disciplines and using different data set and then various research the approaches. So we had 10 chapters for this book. And then, but 4 main sections that we had for this edited volume. So one of them is negotiating identity, and then also making lives under immigration control, and also claiming rights and building lives, and also meanings of a multicultural family and intergenerational relationships. So this is from Rutgers University Press, and then I just included link there. So it's I'm not planning to cover all those things, but I kind of wanted to make point about some of the issues that we see from especially children and youth of a multicultural family. But just to go to briefly about the contents that we have for the book. So for the first section, we had 3 chapters here, to be accepted as we are. So multiple identity formation of Filipino marriage immigrants through Jasmine Lee. So Jasmine Lee was the first politician that we had as non-Korean individual. And also we had money matters, immigrants, motherhood. So that's also dealing with some of the issues about a lot of marriage immigrant women dealing with parenting. So we know that, Korea is really kind of competitive and, parenting and educating the kids and also investing all the resources for the kids. It's a really kind of hot issue there. But then, some mothers, they were a lot of marriage immigrant women. As a mother, they were kind of struggling to raise the kids because it's not something that they were used to and then they kind of thought about. But then it was at the same time, it was really difficult for them to kind of navigate through the system so that their kids can be kind of competitive in the educational system. And also developing and negotiating social identity among Korean women with Pakistani husbands. So that's also one of the cases that I sort of mentioned earlier that, a lot of international marriages happen between Korean men and also non-Korean women. So this type of couples were sort of like, not necessarily visible in the system in Korea. So what the couples were kind of like, struggling to kind of live their life. And also what, some of the issue about not necessarily well accepting social environment about Hinduism, like, so that was also one of the kind of multi-layered issue here too. And we also had chapters for like here, precarious family making among undocumented migrant women, and also what Korean Chinese kinship relationships and cause to reclaim time in South Korea. And also we had chapters about unbearable weightiness of marriage. So this is also about citizenship and marriage. And then, a lot of marriages, like anywhere else, so they get married. Some couples don't necessarily work out, but then, they sometimes divorce. But then divorced married immigrant women, they were kind of, left without much support from the government. So what we were dealing with, we were looking at some of those issues coming from the kind of case, and then integration, mobility, and well-being after divorce. That was also a kind of tapping onto some of these patterns that we observed. And then here, so we were also looking at, intergenerational relationships. So here, a little bit more focusing on this to kind of think about second generation disadvantage. So this one was also what, one of my contributing chapter for the volume is that, so we define second generation kids, second generation immigrants is the kids or, people, individuals with the parents where one of them is not native, Korean native, one of them or both of them. So we were looking at second generation children and youth, and then their like health and well-being here. So just to kind of think about like, what that might mean. So I don't know if you have seen like this image. So his name is Hyunmin Han. So he's also a kid of international marriage. And I believe his father is from Nigeria and then his mother is Korean. But then he was born and raised in Korea, and then so his skin color is kind of dark. So he was having a hard time while he was growing up, but then he became this like fashion model, and then he was having good success, and then he was actually one of the most influential teens of 2017. So he was pretty popular. I think he's still popular. He's very active. So this kind of image might just might make us think that Korea maybe might be more open, and then maybe we are really like multicultural. I also have one other image of these kids. They are super cute. So they are also kids of international couple in Korea, and then I believe their father is Caucasian from Australia, and then their mother is Korean, but then they are like sort of like influencer, and then they have like over millions of the followers on their Instagrams, and they've been really like successful. So they're super cute. And then these kids is very active and popular, and also these adorable kids are very well loved and liked in the society. But at the same time, we see, oftentimes like, incidents, we see those incidents that school bullying is not uncommon, especially targeting the kids from multicultural family. And also their school outcome is not necessarily positive either. So their school dropout rate is much higher than their counterparts. And also their overall academic performance is poorer than their counterpart. So characteristics of the second generation immigrant adolescents, children and adolescents. So they tend not to be living with both parents, meaning that, their parents don't necessarily have a stable marriage relationship. So either separated or divorced compared to their counterparts. And also they tend to have a lower educated parents. And then they tend to live in rural areas. And then they are also more likely to report low levels of academic performance. And then they're also more likely to attend specialized vocational school rather than general high school, aiming to go to college. And also they tend to more likely to experience tobacco as a teenagers. So this is kind of health outcomes that we observed from the data that we used. So this is a suicidal ideation. So what I think the question was asking if you have thought about, killing yourself in the past year, but then yes or no, and then we see much higher percentage of saying yes among the kids from multicultural family. And then suicidal attempt, so have you attempted to kill yourself in the past year? So I think that's the question. The same pattern that we saw here, so the attempt rate is much higher among the kids from multicultural family compared to kids from non-multicultural family. And BMI, if you look at BMI, so higher rate for underweight and also higher rates for overweight. So it doesn't seem to be kind of maintaining healthy weights, especially among the kids from multicultural family. And then self-rated health, this is a question when we ask like, how is you rate your health? So 1 being poor and 5 being excellent. And then we see like lower levels, so poorer, lower levels of health observed among kids from multicultural family. So we don't necessarily see much difference in terms of like global happiness and are you happy, things like that. And then stress level, depression, we didn't necessarily see like, at least statistically significant difference between two. But then by looking at those like suicide ideation attempt and BMI and self-rated health, those like differences between the kids, depending on whether they have international couple, like international married couple or not, just makes a little bit kind of difference. So that's kind of concerning here. So our aim here, our hope here is that we would like to view migrants as settlers or first generation immigrants in Korea whose post-migration lives have evolved and whose membership in Korea society has matured. So instead of just a stranger, instead of just outsider, instead of like just foreign-born individual or non-Korean, then I think it is really time for us to kind of see them as part of our society. And also we gotta go beyond social adaptation programs. I think I briefly mentioned earlier that, a lot of those programs tend to just, provide programs where, oh yeah, we can teach Korean. So that's good. And then we can teach you like how to make kimchi. And then we can teach you what it means to have, those like the family like rituals for the New Year's Day and things like that by preparing what kind of food. So what those things are not necessarily bad things, but then all the supporting programs are gonna go beyond those like adaptation programs. And also to include the families of diverse contemporary immigrants and their children too. So we just tended to focus more on those specific type of international marriages, but then it is just a type of international marriages, and then the type of the patterns of the immigration and as well as international marriages tend to be more diverse now. And then since it has been kind of increasing since 1990, and then their kids are now like young adults and also young adults and going into kind of middle ages too. So we got to think about how their life could be in Korea, depending on how we can actually see them, how we can actually, embrace the diversity in the society too. So this is, I wasn't so sure how I was doing with the time. So hopefully I didn't overtime much, but yeah, this is what I have today. And any questions would be appreciated.
So could you stand?
Yeah, sure.
right about
Over here. Okay.
Yeah, so we're both in this.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Professor Woo, for a fascinating talk on multicultural families in South Korea. So I have a few questions of my own. I'll be fielding questions from both the audience and those of you participating through Zoom. In the interest of time, we'll have to have a somewhat truncated question and answer session. But I'm being a little bit selfish here in that I do have something that I am very curious about. So first of all, thank you. The talk was fascinating. It was enlightening on this important topic, which is becoming of greater salience given the prominence of immigration in South Korea. One question I had concerned gender, and this was especially evident when you gave the two examples, one of the chat of beautiful women, 미녀들의 수다, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then the other work, which was from the male international perspective, which was 비정상 회담,
Right.
and or unusual. 회담 is not conference, it's not chat, it's a little bit more formal. Right? A speech or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And both those images and the description, the Korean description on this were really stood out to me. So first, it seems to be emphasizing the gender role division in the workforce, right? We have men on the right who are dressed up. And when looking at the statistics of these international marriages, when it's foreign men with Korean women, they tend to come from higher income countries.
Yeah.
Whereas the women, international marriage women's side, they tend to come from lower income nations. And on top of that, the speech by women is given this somewhat derogatory term, 수다, right?
Yeah.
수다 is not intellectual.
Yeah.
It's not something that
Gossip, right?
yeah, it's not something that a working woman would
Yeah.
do, right? Whereas the term used for the foreign men, 회담 is much more serious, right?
Yeah.
So it seems to be reinforcing gender roles that women, whether they're international or domestic, their job is to be the minya, the beautiful woman, not the employee, not the working woman. Whereas the job of the men is to come from high income countries, to wear a suit, to go to the workplace. So in your view, did you see how some sense that this is reinforcing gender roles? Is this a concern from the government? Have people been speaking out against this?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really, really good question. And then that's exactly how things have been. So yeah, you're exactly right. You know, it's different. And then it says like 미녀들의 수다. It's like, oh, like gossip by beauties, right?
Yeah.
And then 비정상 회담, it's like, you know, they are like from different countries and they act like they're representing their countries.
Okay.
And then also some of the topics, it was, you know, oh yeah, what kind of guys you'd be interested in dating, things like that. And then what kind of guys like turn you down, things like that. But then here they were talking about like social issues. They were discussing like cultural differences and, you know, so but the contents were really different and also the formatting was really different too. So that's how it was kind of depicting. That I'm not like, you know, I'm not arguing. I think that's really correct. So in terms of like demographic differences in terms the international like couples makeup, so that's also a pretty kind of striking to me too, because, you know, so here for men, so they were usually a majority of those Korean men were relatively older and then relatively lower educated and then relatively lower income. And then, so we say like not marriageable men, and then, you know, but then, so no one is gonna marry them. And then they gotta just, that's why Korean government, they just want you to like bring brides from other countries. But then here, they didn't do anything to encourage like marriage for these women. And then it's sort of like happened this way.
Okay.
So what, yeah, it's not the same. So the general patterns are exactly what you are kind of describing, kind of what you're observing here. But then at the same time, although it's not majority, but then some portion of the international marriages happen between like Korean women and non-Korean men when they actually met in a factory, when they were like working, and then, you know,
Yeah.
they were working together in the same factory, and then they just started dating, and then they started living together, and then they were getting married, things like that. So what those couples were really, really kind of lag behind in terms of like policy, like support, and also
Okay.
attention from the society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That answers that really well. And I think this is a salient issue, especially given the gender pay gap between in South Korea. My concern is that portraying these international marriages actually reinforces the idea that the women don't work, right? At least that seems to be the image given here through international marriages. And we have a question off of Zoom.
Yeah, we have a question from Bruce Fulton. Bruce, if you would like to unmute yourself and show us, ask the question yourself, we'll be happy to have you do that.
Thank
Bruce?
you. I was on sabbatical in Korea in 2011 and came across an article in the Tonga Ilbo suggesting that foreign women, especially in the countryside, were experiencing significant communication problems with their children, especially after they had entered the Korean school system. Is that still a challenge for some mothers?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point too. Oh, my appointment. Okay, yeah. So that's a really good point too. So that's the thing when, you know, people didn't necessarily appreciate different language, you know, if it's not English, right? So the mothers, the marriage immigrant mothers, so they were sort of like discouraged to communicate with their kids using their own language. Rather, they were like encouraged to communicate with their kids with Korean. So it's not necessarily, you know, embracing whatever diversity that we would like to have in the society. So that was a kind of big issue. But then at the same time, we had like different like marriage migrant women from different countries. And then some country like Philippines, their English is, the majority of the people, they're pretty fluent with English, right? So there are some hierarchy even among marriage immigrant women. If they speak English fluently, then, you know, their hierarchy tend to be higher. And also a Chinese community, they tend to have a strong like community, and then their hierarchy tend to be kind of higher. But then if it's not the case like that, then, you know, they were having more like difficult time in the country.
Okay, yeah, so I think in the interest of the time, we can take maybe two more questions. Yes, Diane?
When a Korean man marries a foreign woman, does the woman get Korean citizenship
Easily.
easily?
Yeah.
Okay, and are the children then automatically citizens?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the children in Korea, I mean, you know, if your parents are Korean citizen, then, you know, it is automatically that you're going to be Korean citizen.
Okay, and then we have a question from Jerry. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, Jerry, we can
Yeah. Mine's just a quick one. Are there any differences in divorce rates nationally between a Korean couple versus Korean non-Korean couple?
Yeah, so divorce rates tend to be higher among the international married couple, which are sort of like reasonable, right? I mean, they tend to have cultural differences. They tend to have, you know, more like communication, like challenges. And then, yeah, so they don't necessarily have a lot of like support system where they live, things like that. So what short answer for that is yes, they tend to have a higher rate of divorce.
Yeah, I think we have time for one. Yeah.
Yeah, in the case of foreign women and Korean men marriage, especially in rural areas, have there been studies on the rate of spousal abuse?
So sort of like yes and no. I mean, yes, there are a lot of studies looking at domestic violence issues among those couples, but then no, because we don't necessarily have like national information to make some comparisons, because we don't have a really like well documented like entire like people, right? And then we see those like couples as cases. So yeah, we do have studies, but then we don't necessarily know how to make some comparisons with non-international couples.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, So thank you. Thank you for this a very enlightening presentation and
Thank you.
yeah, your explanation. And I look forward to reading your new edited volume, not monograph, edited volume. So yeah,
Thank
thanks
you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And so with that, I'd like to move us to the next part of the program today, which is a presentation of the Friends of Korea Giving Back Award. Now, this is part of the Friends of Korea program, and it's something that's an important part of our annual events and outreach. And for today, we will be presenting the Friends of Korea Award to the Institute for Asian Studies here at Portland State University, where the director, of course, was Professor Woo. The Institute for Asian Studies here at Portland State University, as Professor Woo mentioned earlier, is a crucial organization. They represent over 70 faculty and professionals are working through this organization. And they represent a huge range of disciplinary specialties, drawing from experts from 30 departments to host lectures and give talks on topics of import, including Professor Woo's own multicultural families in South Korea. It represents a great consortium of intellectuals with who are active in research and public advocacy for Asian studies. And it's an organization that I have some fondness for myself because I've given, I believe, 2 or 3 talks through the Institute for Asian Studies here at Portland State University when I myself was faculty here. So it is with great pleasure that the Friends of Korea is offering $2,500 through our Giving Back initiative to the Institute for Asian Studies at Portland State University. And with that, let's turn it over to
Thanks, Dan. Thank you so much. Moving along, and that was such an enlightening presentation, but now we're going to move to our Kevin O'Donnell Distinguished Friend of Korea Award. And I'd like to just give you a little bit of background on the award. The Kevin O'Donnell Distinguished Friend of Korea Award recognizes individuals distinguished by their accomplishments that are consistent with the overarching mission of Friends of Korea, to foster cultural awareness and friendship between Americans and Koreans. The award is a lasting tribute to the extraordinary contributions made by Kevin O'Donnell, U.S. Peace Corps' first country director in Korea and the 4th director of the Peace Corps. In 1966, Kevin O'Donnell accepted an assignment from the Peace Corps to be the first country director for South Korea. His assignment was to establish educational programs in English, math, science, and physical education. And because each host nation has such different needs and wants, there was no single recipe for establishing a program. So unlike his U.S. Embassy and military counterparts, the Kevin O'Donnell had to rely on the local Korean economy for staff, housing, and office space. The language was difficult to master, the culture an enigma to most Americans. To quote Kevin O'Donnell, he said, "You went in and you sank or swam." So as 40 years later, fast forwarding, the Korea Society in New York recognized the tremendous role and impact of Peace Corps during its 15-year commitment in Korea with the 2008 James A. Van Fleet Award given to prominent Korean and American individuals or organizations. Kevin O'Donnell, as the first country director of Peace Corps Korea, accepted the award on behalf of volunteers. So it's so fitting that this evening we are honoring Don Mosley as the recipient of the 2023 Kevin O'Donnell Award. This year's awardee, Don Mosley, began his career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia, back in the mid-1960s, followed by working directly with Kevin O'Donnell, then Director of Peace Corps Korea, as a regional representative in Gangwon-do and Seoul in the late 1960s. Personally, I was assigned to Gangwon-do as a K4 volunteer, and Don was my link to Peace Corps Seoul. Don went on to be a co-founder of Habitat for Humanity in the 1970s. During this time, he organized and participated in the construction of early habitat builds, many with his longtime friend, former President Jimmy Carter. Don and Carolyn Mosley are founding members of the Jubilee Partners community in Georgia, which has hosted thousands of refugees from more than 40 countries around the world. Part of Jubilee Partners' mission is to extend hospitality to newly arrived refugees. Don is the author of Faith Beyond Borders, Doing Justice in a Dangerous World, and in part of the book, he describes his role in planning a Fuller Center building project in North Korea in 2008. It was then that Kevin O'Donnell, who was then 82 years of age at the time, accompanied Don to Pyongyang to plan for the construction of 50 homes. It all came full circle. Adding Don Mosley as a recipient of the Kevin O'Donnell Award is well-deserved and fitting. And here to accept the award via Zoom is Don Mosley. But Don, before we have you say a few words to us, we'd like to show a video.
Given eyes to see, eyes to see, eyes to see, given eyes to see, but I can't see you.
As I told Jimmy just 2 weeks ago, and exactly two weeks ago to the minute, right now I was standing in his bedroom talking with him and with Rosalind, and they're both very old at 98 and 95. And he cannot stand up anymore. He's always in a wheelchair or leaning back in this tilt back chair. And so I was telling both of them, you know, I said, Jimmy, what I am grateful for is that I think of you primarily as a Sunday school teacher who inspired people for 70 years that you taught Sunday school. Secondly, I think of you as a former president and as a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize and those kinds of things. But mostly it's because you go out there and put what you taught people out on Sunday mornings out of the Bible about loving your enemies and loving people around you, and you put it into practice. And so you're a Sunday school teacher who went out and acted on it. And Jimmy and Rosalind both smiled and nodded and laughed and said, that's great. I'm glad you think of us that way, not just as politicians. He's had a deep faith. He grew up in a setting where he was able to not just hear fire and brimstone all the time, but he was fortunate enough to be in a church about going out and, you know, the emphasis was on what Jesus did when he looked out and saw the multitudes and they were hungry, and so he fed them, and he met enemies and he blessed them and made friends of them. And if it was women, even if they were prostitutes or whatever, no, Jesus loved them. He reached out to people and affirmed them. And so this got through to Jimmy and became part of his personality at a very young age. I know Jimmy very well and understand that that's been his basic motivation for his lifetime. All the time I've known him, for sure. The Carter Center, which he brainstormed with me one day in his mother's living room. And I mean, he was already brainstorming about it, and he said he wanted me to come over and chat with him some. And so I got to sit there and talk about this possibility of an organization. This is after he left the White House, of course, an organization that could have a big impact on peacemaking type issues, health issues, and election supervision, to have fair elections and all the rest around the world. And then out of that grew the Carter Center. millions of people around the world are alive today and healthier, have more food to eat, medical facilities available, housing available, and all the rest because of their efforts than anyone else I know. They are people who put love into action. I guess that's, I can't think of a better way to express it, but they just express their love to all kinds of people, even goofy people like me. And it just makes me want to get out there and work harder than ever to be a peacemaker like them.
I call your name. You were mine before you were made. If you search for a sign.
Don, we'd love to have you say a few words to the group.
Well, thank you very much. I really don't know what to add. Well, I do. I can talk for hours, of course, but I will not, I promise. I just want to say that it was an exciting thing for me at the beginning of this program an hour ago to see that photograph of Kevin standing there with his characteristic smile, talking, and other folks all gathered around him. I was so privileged to be able to come in 1967 and be an early staff member working with Kevin O'Donnell right there most of the 2 years that I was there, serving as regional director over Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do and Seoul, usually about 100 to 120 volunteers under my direction, under my concerns at that time. Most of that time I actually was working out of the same office with, or just next door down the hall from Kevin, and I had many meetings with him, many fun conversations, sometimes difficult. But the thing that I loved about Kevin, and that makes me proud to be here tonight and has shaped my life a lot, was seeing how Kevin himself put love into action, as our later friend Jimmy Carter definitely has for many years. I worked with Kevin and I learned a lot from Kevin, and I fell in love with the people of Korea. And I continue to think that I don't know why I was so fortunate to be able to come to Korea, to be so inspired by the people there who were suffering so much from great poverty at that point in 67, 68, 69, and still, the effects of the war and all the rest, and yet had such a beautiful spirit. And it was an inspiring thing. But one of my favorite memories of Kevin was shortly after I arrived there with my brand new bride. We had just gotten married about 3 or 4 months before we got to South Korea. Here she is, Carolyn Mosley. Kevin looked at her and said, "Don, you are married to a beautiful woman." Hey, I agree, Kevin. And I still am. What is this, 56 years later? Carolyn and I have been through adventure after adventure after adventure around the world, and just continue to enjoy things that largely we learned from being there as we started our marriage there in South Korea. So while we were in South Korea, and I should insert here that before I started traveling so much and then became a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia and so on, I lived in a very privileged family, loving parents and all of that, and very rapidly increasing wealth in our family. We had airplanes, we had all kinds of things. I won't go into all of that, but we were segregated from other people of different races, and it was a situation that began to dawn on me in my teens, and that I finally found ways to break out of. And I was one of the very first people to apply to President Kennedy's brand new Peace Corps. I put my application in 1961 and ended up going overseas then for the 2 years in Malaysia. Well, while I was in Korea, I was learning. In Malaysia, I had fallen in love with all kinds of Asians, Indians, Malays, and Chinese that I lived with and worked with. And then I got to Korea and fell in love with the Korean people. And while there, I began to hear about this place called Quintanilla Farm, and a man named Clarence Jordan, Dr. Clarence Jordan, who had founded that back in 1942 down in South Georgia. And so Carolyn, bless her heart, she's always kind of crazy. She has said yes over and over again to my crazy proposals that we do this or do that. I said, let's go there and at least spend a few months living there where the KKK had been shooting at these people at this place, because Clarence Jordan and the others had worked so hard, vigorously and fearlessly against the racism in that area. We went there and we spent the summer of 1970, right after we got home from the Peace Corps work. And everything was pockmarked with bullet holes and things like that. And yet we were so drawn to the way we saw people putting their love into action and working against racism that we ended up staying there for 8 years. And Millard Fuller, who had taken Clarence Jordan, we actually never quite met Clarence because he died of a heart attack just before we got there. But Millard Fuller he was a very dynamic young man who had just been given the leadership of the community, put me in charge of the housing program, which they had just started, just barely started. And I oversaw the construction of 2 or 3 dozen houses. And then I'm jumping over a whole bunch there were 20 books written about all of this in different places. But Millard then ended up going to Africa. He and I brainstormed and came up with the idea of what became Habitat for Humanity. And I went to Africa and helped actually design and survey the first project that became the first official habitat project in the world in Bandaka, Zaire. And then when Millard came back, we officially launched Habitat and began to work in other projects all over the world. And so all of this, and well, I should say another thing, my sweet wife, who unfortunately she had to step aside because she started coughing just now, but I'll just say that she became the president of the PTA 8 miles down the street, down the road from Quintanilla Farm there in South Georgia, in a little town called Plains, where there was a very ambitious peanut farmer who was beginning to work his way up through politics and had been launched into politics by his concern about racism also. And so we became friends. I wrote one of his first speeches that he made as president, in fact, about racism and so on. Carolyn became the PTA president there in Plains, at Plains Elementary School, where their little daughter, Amy, at that point was about 8 years old, and our son, who was about the same age, were both students. And so I would babysit Amy and Tony and other kids with the Secret Service out there too, while Jimmy and Rosalind were out on the campaign trail, successfully campaigning for the White House. And then after they came home from the White House 4 years later, and I'll skip over all kinds of adventures here, but it was while Jimmy and I and Rosalind were sitting in their living room one day that he said that he would like to work with Habitat. Habitat, we had started late in the 70s officially and begun to really spread. And so I told him, Jimmy, I've been on the board for the first 7 years now since we started Habitat, and I can tell you, you don't want to go to all those many meetings that they have and so on. He said, no, I'm serious. I want to be on the Habitat board of directors. He was elected immediately by the rest of the board. And at his very first meeting, he said, I want to propose that we have a special called meeting of the International Board of Directors and the senior staff to brainstorm for 3 days about how to cause Habitat to grow around the world even faster than it had already. It had already been really climbing, been at least 15 or 20 countries already by that time. And he said, I propose that that meeting take place at Jubilee Partners. Oh my goodness, they called me and told me, and that's where Carolyn and I are sitting right now. We started Jubilee in 1979, and we built this room, this building right here that you see in the background here, as fast as we could to have the room as a meeting for a place for that meeting. And Jimmy, and there was no furniture in it. We just barely got the walls up and everything. This was January in 1986, and and Jimmy and Rosalind, the Secret Service, and to my amazement, not 20 or 30 people as I expected, but 60 people packed into this room, and there was no furniture, no books, no bookshelves or anything, no carpet on the floor. So Jimmy and Rosalind, actually, you see this window behind me here, they were sitting on the floor for the meeting with the Secret Service standing in several places around. This was something I had not quite counted on, but it kept getting more and more exciting. And so it has led to trips all over the world in which we have started new habitat projects, in which I went with the Carters to Nepal to supervise an election there between the Maoists and the royal family, and many other adventures. And Carolyn and I have gone down many times to visit Jimmy, as you saw in the little movie a while ago, and Jimmy and Rosalind, and we love them very much. They are just wonderful people. So I'll just wrap it up by saying this, that for whether it's the Carters or back to Kevin and Ellen O'Donnell and their family, and their granddaughter, by the way, Allison, has been a volunteer here at Jubilee. I've just been so inspired by people not just talking about love or talking about helping people or being peacemakers, but doing the Peace Corps thing. Go out there and put your love into action. And we here at Jubilee have had the great fortune of hosting, as you may have heard just now, something a little over 4,000 refugees here in 44 years now, from more than 40 countries all over the world. And right now, we have people here from several different countries, mostly mothers who have been driven out by the violence, drug cartels and wars, and from Africa and Central America. On our staff right now, we have a wonderful young couple from Seoul, Korea, Koreans who are part of our volunteer staff right now. This past week, I wish all of you could have met the 4 other Korean visitors who came down and spent several days with us from Chicago. this is a wonderful international place to enjoy those kinds of things that I think I know Kevin O'Donnell would enjoy being here for a while. I wish we could have him back and could have him come here as a volunteer for a few months. That would be wonderful. Meanwhile, I just thank you so much for all of you friends of Korea are continuing to do, and that have set the stage for things like our trip to North Korea, two trips to North Korea. And I wish I had time to explain more about that, but Richard McIntyre, who's on the program tonight, Richard was one of the people, and Kevin O'Donnell in that first delegation when we went there about 15 years ago. And it was just such an inspiring thing to go out and to talk with the North Koreans and to let our love become obvious and to have their response loving in response. The problem, one final thing I'll just say, is that the reason that housing project did not really take off, and because the North Koreans were very excited about it, but the skepticism in this country, I could not raise enough funds. Millard Fuller died just at a critical time in that, and he could have raised the funds. I could only raise about half of what we needed really to launch that big project. And so finally, the North Koreans asked us just to step back and forget it. But we've got a lot more work to do, folks, and it's exciting work, and it all comes down to doing what I think Kevin did so well: go out and put our love into action. Not necessarily all over the world. I mean, yes, traveling in other countries too, but with the children right around us and all the rest. And so let's keep it up. And thank you so much for honoring me in this way, and Carolyn with this Kevin O'Donnell Award. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Carolyn. We are moved by what you have done, your words, your actions, and the message that you leave with us. So we have more to add to this wonderful program this evening. It's kind of hard to follow Don Mosley. But Greg Caldwell, you're going to try. Greg Caldwell, former member of the Friends of Korea Board, is going to handle the
Giving
Giving
back.
Back initiative.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Janice, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Whether you are here in person or viewing online from somewhere around the globe, our Portland community and our friends at Portland State University welcome you and thank you for being with us today at this meeting. I'm Greg Caldwell. I'm the honorary consul for the Republic of Korea in Northern Oregon. At least I am for 2 more months. I've been doing this job for 10 years, and so I am retiring at the end of 2023. And like so many of you here today, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea back in 71, 72, and 73, Case 17, the 17th group to go in. And I was teaching English at Chungup Boys Middle School. 10 years later, I was a Fulbright scholar at Kangwon National University in Chuncheon, and it was my honor to serve on the board of Friends of Korea for a number of years. So like all of you here today, I have a very special place in my heart for Korea. Some weeks ago, Jerry called me and asked me if I would do the introduction of the Giving Back initiative today and to present the award, and of course it's my honor to do so. As background for the award, I wanted to read from the Friends of Korea website. The Giving Back initiative was launched in 2014. I was on the board at that time, when members of the Friends of Korea board expressed support for a more organized approach to service and to philanthropy. The goal of this initiative is to move Friends of Korea to a deeper level of engagement with the many Korean communities, organizations, and institutions in both Korea and the U.S. We are committed to supporting organizations and institutions that provide essential social services to members of the Korean American community, as well as to institutions and other organizations whose activities foster greater understanding between Americans and Koreans. So that's the history of it. And the grant that goes along with it offers $2,500, usually presented to an organization that is in the area where the Friends of Korea meeting is held. I think this is a good idea. We decided this years ago, instead of having the annual meetings always in DC, that we would move them around the country. This would engage a wider audience, and it highlights a local community organization that is doing great work as it relates to fostering better understanding between Americans and Koreans. Since 2014, Friends of Korea has donated about $75,000 to organizations as part of the Giving Back initiative, and that certainly makes a difference. At Jerry's request, some weeks ago, I provided the Friends of Korea board a list of local organizations and their websites here in Oregon that might qualify for this year's award. And I think there were 6 to 8 organizations on the list. And the board, after looking at the websites and doing proper research, made what I think was a unanimous decision to award this year's grant to the Adult Korean Adoptees of Portland, or what we call AKAP. The purpose of AKAP is to build community for Korean adoptees and to provide support, resources, and a connection to their Korean heritage. I've worked closely with AKAP for the last 8 to 10 years, and I've learned a lot. I had many misconceptions about the adoption process and what adoptees go through. They've given me an education over the last few years. One thing that many of you may not know if you're living outside of Oregon is that Oregon is the home of Holt International, which is the first adoption agency to open the doors basically to Korean adoptees from that country. And the result is that we have thousands of Korean adoptees in our state. Examples of that, our honorary consul in Southern Oregon, Susan Cox, is a Korean adoptee, one of the first waivers. So she was one of the first groups of adoptees to come here. Our Deputy Secretary of State, Cheryl Meyer, is a Korean adoptee. We're in Multnomah County today, and one of the county commissioners, Lori Stegman, is a Korean adoptee. So we have many influential adoptees here. I've learned from AKAP board members that each adoptee has his or her own individual story. Certainly no two are the same. Some are heartwarming and inspirational, and others are tragic and sad. And I've learned the trepidation that many of the AKAP adoptees feel about searching for their birth parents or about going back to Korea to search for their roots. What AKAP does is a real service for adoptees. First of all, AKAP members can share their stories with other adoptees, usually in private groups, and some of these are very personal stories and of course very emotional. They share their fears and concerns, they encourage and reassure each other. They tell us what it's like to be a Korean adoptee, often raised in a Caucasian family. And AKAP helps to facilitate travel for its members to go back to Korea. And increasingly, AKAP under this year's board does a very good job of planning events, workshops, and outreach to the adoptees and helps connect them to the Korean American community. I'm very impressed with how the group has evolved over the past 10 years from what was once a very private group, almost secretive group, to a very open, very active organization that provides interesting ways to support and integrate the adoptee community. So today we are privileged to have 3 of the 4 members of AKAP who are with us. Why don't you please come down? I want you to be on camera so you people can see you. So we have with us today, I don't know, can they see that at all?
No, come in a little closer.
Come over, yeah, here we go, yeah. Krista, this is Krista Kaniparoli Goodwin. She is the president of AKAP. In her day job, she is an independent skincare and action wear consultant. Then we have Sojin Rank, who is the vice president. Sojin is the senior manager of brand and design for SaaS, which is a software as a service company. Erin could not be here today. Erin is the secretary. She lives way down on the coast and is having some health issues today, so she couldn't be with us, but she spends a lot of her time helping with disabled and Korean adoptee communities. And then Hannah, we have Hannah here, who is the treasurer, and she works in higher education here in a local university. So I want to thank the 3 of you and all of your members and say thank you for all the good work that you do. And we will present, as Jerry said, I don't have a check to give you today. The check is in the mail. So, but eventually it'll be here. But thank you and congratulations. And Christy, you want to say a few words?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know where I look.
Yeah.
And I'm very short. So thank you, Greg, again, for that kind introduction and continuous advocacy and support for ACAP. We appreciate it so much. We are so honored to be selected as the grant recipients for the Friends of Korea 2023 Giving Back Initiative. As Greg mentioned, ACAP's mission is to build community for Korean adoptees and provide support, resources, and a connection to our Korean heritage. Our identity as Korean American adoptees often creates a gap in knowledge about our birth culture. Exploration of our Korean heritage can be overwhelming, disheartening, and often isolating. There's a looming expectation of previous knowledge that we didn't grow up with. ACAP creates a safe space to learn about Korean culture with an understanding of the adoptee experience. With this grant money, we are excited to organize more of these Korean cultural events. So once again, we really appreciate this grant from Friends of Korea. Thank you again and 감사합니다.
Congratulations. Thank you, Greg. This brings us to the end of our meeting, and I'd like to thank again all of our presenters, our speakers, Don and Carolyn Mosley, all of you who have joined us virtually, and those of you who are with us today in Portland. Please think about helping, maybe joining the board, being a volunteer with Friends of Korea. We'd love to have you join us. And thank you especially to someone who doesn't get a lot of thanks, and she shows up faithfully every time we do this, Ekaterina, who makes sure that everybody can see and hear. So thank you. We've gone a little bit past our time, and I want to be mindful of that. But Jerry, do you have anything you want to say before we close?
Yes, I'd like to thank Janice. I want to thank Ekaterina, Greg Caldwell, Diane, Corina Hughes, Professor Wu, all of the people that were involved in the organization of tonight's meeting. And to hear the very uplifting stories about AKAP, Don Mosley and Jubilee, with what they're doing at the commemoration park in Peace Corps. I found this very uplifting tonight, and it motivates me to try to do more as well. And I hope you find the same as well. And as Janice said, become involved in Friends of Korea, or have someone that you know become involved in Friends of Korea. We are an organization who tries to really walk the walk. And so everything that we get into the organization, we try to get back out into the community. So once again, thank you everyone tonight. Ekaterina, thank you again for making this technologically possible. We appreciate that very much. And everyone have a good evening.